Hmm. Hi, it's not really the rabbi, it's me, but I seem to be able to let you in. So I did. It's just so weird that I'm him.
Shelly, I didn't realize you were so involved with FIDF. My daughter works there.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I hope it's okay. You know what? I was.
Oh, did you start the meeting, Shelly?
I was completely you. I had to admit things today. I don't know. I guess I'm not quitting properly.
Are you having an identity crisis?
So who's your daughter? She works for FIDF.
Her name is Aviva, but she
Okay, so we're recording now, and good morning, everyone. What I wanted to do this morning, even though Emor is a jam-packed parsha, there's really a lot that's in there for it's not short. It's fairly long. I just know this because we have a bar mitzvah this week, and I had the bar mitzvah boy has the marks to show how long the parsha was, because I hit him every time he didn't study. Oh, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to hit children, of course not. I spoke to him with love and encouragement only. He's actually quite a sweet boy, Simeon, and he's I think actually, so Vivian is related to the Migdals, so she hopefully will be here for Shams. I think she's going to be in up the hill. Anyway, but this Friday is Lag BaOmer. So if Lag BaOmer is known as the if I ask you, like, what's Lag BaOmer, right? What are you going to say? We have a big youth event allegedly on Thursday night, weather permitting. And what's the activity?
Bonfire and archery.
Bonfire and archery. We're going to shoot arrows into the fire and burn them. And so why a bonfire and archery? Why? She said that's Lag BaOmer. How's that for a tautological answer? Right? It's like so we know, like, it's a thing. Like when we were in school, that's when we would go have outings.
Right, field day.
Field day, right? We'd go play baseball or something. So, and if you've ever been in Israel for Lag BaOmer, which is a big problem now, as you know, that there's been a lot of these fake permits that are going on. And one of the reasons that there's such an abundance of them taking place now is because people want to go to Israel for Lag BaOmer and they want to go to Meron. So if you go to Meron, which is in the north of Israel, north of Tzfat area, and it's like, that's the place, that's the kever of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. And you hear the Sephardim when they sing the song, we say Bar Yochai, but you guys say it. You say every Friday night, you hold your noses and you say, Bar Yochai, right? That's what it sounds like. So, and they said, what's his Bar? So who's Bar Yochai? Why? Because you're Sephardic. Miriam is here. She's Sephardic, and she should know this. Okay, you don't know. So Bar Yochai was Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, of course, was of Talmudic fame, and we're going to see his Talmudic fame right here in front of us. So it's actually the first page is not the one with the title. The first page is the one without the title, just for spacing reasons. Okay. So this one I want to share with you is a Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Lamed Beis. Amid Beis. Okay, this is 33b Lamed Gimel Amid Beis in Shabbos. And you see on the left column, so I just took the English. It's a lot if I would do the whole text, but I just took the English from the Ein Yaakov, and it's a fascinating Gemara, and you're going to learn something about personalities of the Talmud, but also a tremendous lesson here. So, right by the shmuchak on the left, as you can see, my very, very sophisticated mark on the left side which is supposed to resemble somewhat of an arrow, somewhat of I can't do anything. Okay, so it once happened. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai were sitting together. Okay, you see that on the page? Good. So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon were sitting together, and Yehuda, the son of proselytes, was sitting. His name was Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Elai. So there's two Rabbi Yehudas. One Rabbi Yehuda bar Elai, and one is Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim. So Rabbi Yehuda bar Elai opens the discussion by observing how beautiful are the works of this nation, the Romans, because they're living under the Roman occupation. They're about to come. The destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is imminent. All these things are happening. So they have made streets, bridges, and built public baths. Rabbi Yossi was silent, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai answered, whatever they have done was only for their own benefit. They made streets in order to set harlots in them, baths in order to enjoy themselves in them, bridges in order to collect tolls from those who cross them. Okay, so stop right there. This conversation could very well take place today. Today. Okay, this is what happens when people get together and they start talking about politics. Now, it's not politics per se, but it is all about politics. So if you're sitting in a group with 4 or 5 people and someone has the audacity to either praise or criticize the current government, I mean, you could just imagine that all hell breaks loose. Okay, so you learn there's no benefit can come from discussing politics. Okay, and that's why people are loath to the people have lost friendships over that. People have lost family members, relationships over these types of things. So you just have to know, like, you know what? Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. So here somebody says, oh, look, we have this beautiful street. We have these roads. Amazing. And by the way, there's something nice about, like I remember the first time I was on the new Goethals Bridge, or the new Kosciuszko Bridge. Can anybody spell Kosciuszko Bridge? And the first time, when you see these new structures, like, wow, that's really amazing. They don't need the cords, the strings anymore. They could build these bridges without them, and it's just a work of net. Or the new Tapazee Bridge, which is now the Governor Cuomo Bridge, which they should unname it. Oh, well, it's named for his father. His father was good. Now the son or whatever. See, there we go, talking about politics. But when you see these things, like, wow, that's amazing. Or you see a newly paved road, that's amazing. It's really beautiful. So maybe it's an innocent comment. But Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, he says, no, you're not looking at it right. It says whatever they've done for themselves. They're not doing it for you. You may have a benefit as a result, but ultimately speaking, it's self-serving. Okay? So now what always happens, by the way, and the rule of thumb is in these conversations, is that there are no secrets. Whenever you tell somebody, oh, this is off the record, or this is not for public consumption, or please don't share this, that means every single person is going to know this within minutes. That's just what happens. That's the rule here in the Talmud. It's the rule in life, which is why the Torah tells you, you know what, just keep your mouth shut. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim, he went and related the words to his students or his parents without intending the information to reach the Romans, Rashi says. But the information was heard by the authorities. Now he didn't mean to be malshin. He didn't mean to tell on his chaverim. It's not malicious, but this is what happens. When you say something and you say it in a harmless fashion, guess what? Harm is caused. Things happen. So, of course, as is always the rule, the word gets out. So the Romans declared, Yehuda bar Milai, who exalted us, he'll be exalted. He's going to become the first speaker on all occasions. Yossi was silent, shall be exiled to Tzipori, and Shimon, who criticized Rome, shall be put to death. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is now sentenced to death. Why? Because he criticized the public works department of the Roman government. He complained that his garbage wasn't picked up or whatever it was, but he said anything they do is not for them. It's not for us. It's for themselves, and they're terrible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, there's several stories like this where the Roman government catches wind of something that the Jews say, and it reflects terribly on the Jewish community, which again is setting the historical precedent for all time, is that when one of us says something negative and it's heard by the wrong party, it reflects negatively on all of us, right? When we would see, one of our own on the cover of the New York Times and it's not a flattering article, guess what? it reflects poorly on all of us. So this is something that we have to constantly be mindful of. And you see it already from the time of the Gemara. So as a result of, and you would say like, what he said, was it so bad? I don't know. When that's, it's not flattering, but is it worthy of a death penalty? In other words, would Rav Shimon Bar Yochai have said that if the Roman general sitting in front of him? I don't know. But certainly they felt very offended by it, and they proceed to issue a death decree against Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay, it wouldn't be the first time in history somebody tried to kill a Jew for something he did or said. It happened to Moshe Rabbeinu. It happened in every generation. Moshe. So what do you do when they issue a death decree against you? You run away. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai runs away. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and his son. So we're continuing in the paragraph here. It's the next paragraph. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Lazar. So it's Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and is known as in the Gemara as Rabbi Lazar ben Rav Shimon. Okay, and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai is Rashbi. So yeah, and you'll see why as a result that he became a very, very holy person, and people flocked to his grave, not just on Lag BaOmer, which is his yard site, but also all year round. I told you I'm not such a holy Jew, and I'm not into like, I'm gonna get myself into trouble, but yeah, it hasn't stopped me before. So I'm not into like davening at the grave so much, and I mean I like to see it and visit, but I don't believe to me there's a lot of avodah zarah aspect. It seems very kind of worshipy, the things that people do at certain righteous people's graves. Let's put it that way, okay? Without naming any names or saying any specific places, but especially if you go to Israel, it's like a big deal, okay? So we were there for the summer, and my wife we're gonna take a tiyul, and any grave north of Tel Aviv we visited. It was like 150 degrees outside, and we're in Tzfat in the old cemetery. We're walking up and down, and it's like 100 degrees, and we're dying, like the water goes so quickly. And then we go to Meron. So go to Meron, and the davening mincha. So good, the davening mincha. Now, I had not been in Meron. This is maybe, 4 or 5 years ago, and I had not been there since I was there for the year when 1989, 90. Now, things have changed a lot. And what's happened in some of they call them the Makomos HaKadoshim, the holy places, is that they've become very commercialized, which to me is an unbelievably distasteful turnoff, how they commercialize. So first of all, there's like, fancy entrances and plastic covers on stuff and signs. So I like to go. And now the way it is like, it's a big tomb. It looks like a half circle, but a long, 3D shape, and the grave is probably not really there. And there's a wall straight down the middle of it because there's men on one side, women on the other side, because the women also should have avodah zarah opportunities. And we're davening mincha there. And by the way, so I know this is very holy because right smack in the middle of the kever on the plastic is a big sticker that says in Hebrew that the worst thing for the Jewish soul is this. The iPhone. The iPhone, the smartphone is the worst thing for the Jewish neshama, and you should obliterate them all from your presence. So naturally, I took a picture of it with my iPhone. I'm davening mincha. A guy like tugs on my sleeve. Like, I'm in the middle of Shemona Esrei, and a guy tugs on my sleeve, and he says, "Listen, you look like a special guy." I wonder how he singled me out. Duh. And he said, "Today and only today, I have the key for the basement room where he's really buried. He's not here. He's really buried like that. For 1,000 shekel, I'll take you down there." And I said, "You know what? I'm good. I just want to hear Kedusha, and I'm out of here." So that's just one of the reasons why. But this has become a holy place. So if you see what happens on Lag BaOmer, and last year it was a source of great consternation and disturbance that the Jews couldn't go to Meron. This year, it's going to be a lot more lively because, people are out and about in Israel. But imagine, I think last year they had like 10 people total in Meron, which is usually thousands and thousands. There are people that fly to Israel just for those 2 days to bring their little 3-year-old Hasidic kids to cut their hair. And the kids are like drunk for like 5 days. They don't know what day it is, what country they're in, and they're cutting their hair and doing all these things. And it's a big thing. And this is because of this story right here. So what happened? Rab Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Lazar, they went and hid in the base medrash, right? Because nobody would look for them there, right? Who would look for them in the study hall?
What are you talking about?
What? What, Gail? No, maybe not for me. So every day, his wife brought them bread and a jug of water, which was their meal. Now, we'll see, by the way, this is kind of like a king's feast compared to what goes on afterwards. So they would sit and hide in the base medrash because nobody would look for them there, and they're getting food every day. When the decree became more severe, an intensive search was launched to find the condemned men. He says to his son, he says, Oive, women are impressionable by nature. The Romans may torture her, then she will expose us. So he, for the safety of his family, he didn't tell his wife where he went. So they went and they hid in a cave. So they went and they hid in the cave, and they go in this cave, and a miracle occurred, and a carob tree and a well of water were created for them. They took off their clothes, sat up to their necks in sand, and learned all day. Now, they didn't have any books because if they're up to their necks in sand, they couldn't turn the pages. I'm being facetious, but obviously they didn't have text, and they're learning everything is Baal Peh. You're talking about these tzaddikim, these Tanoim and Amoram of the highest ilk, who they didn't have Gemaras like we have. But you'll see what they're the founders of, and why we attribute Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. We talk about the founders of the Gemara, they contribute to the Gemara, but the founders, like, I don't know, founders, but the people who sort of arranged and codified the Gemara is Ravina Ravasi. So they when it came time to pray, they put their clothes and they prayed. Then they got undressed again so their clothes wouldn't wear out. And like, how long do you think somebody could stay like this? So they lived for 12 years in the cave. Imagine that, 12 years in a cave. It's like, hey, Dad, what's for dinner? Carob surprise. Buxer a la Buxer. Carob cholent. Okay, so, I mean, it's now, whether you want to take the story literally or figuratively, that's up to you. I'm just sharing. And by the way, this is straight out of the Gemara. Lama Gimel Bezim, straight out of the Gemara, and this is the one. So, but look what happens. It was during these 12 years that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar, which deals with the hidden mystical aspects of the Torah and is the basis of the Kabbalah. Okay, so when we talk about who wrote the Zohar, what's the Zohar? If you look like right above me, you see that those books right on the top of me. There's a whole set of Zohar there. That's really exciting. I actually tried to look something up there once and I got lost. Zohar is Kabbalah. Zohar is really a Perush on Chumash, but it's written in very deep Aramaic and it's very mystical and it's very difficult to understand. And people who, they say when you're over 40, so I'm not old enough yet, when you're over 40 and you want to go learn Zohar, that's what you should do. And study the deeper meaning of the Torah. We say the Torah has something called Sod, right? We say Pardes. There's Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod. Sod is the deepest level of understanding and the mystical level for whatever that might mean. And even though that it didn't come to light maybe till centuries later, but ultimately speaking, the authorship of the Zohar, and here's certainly based on the Gemara, is attributed to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, Rab Elazar ben Rav Shimon. Okay, so they're sitting there for, now just imagine, okay, is that let me give you a mashal, Le'elef alfei havdalos, 1,000 times different, but maybe it's something that we could slightly relate to, okay? If you've ever had that kid, or if you've been that kid, or if you know someone who had that kid that went to Israel for the year and didn't come home for Pesach, and like used this horrible word they used, oh my God, flipped out, okay? Like flipped out. And they came home and they're not gonna eat in your kitchen and this and that. So it's a very hard adjustment when you're living in Israel and all you're doing is studying Torah all day and everything is there for you, all the religious needs that you have are right there. And then you come back to the Gullus, you come back to the diaspora, you come back to Chutz La'aretz. And it's a real struggle for a lot of these young men and women to re-engage or to readapt to life in America. Some of them fail miserably. Some of them do quite well. It's a big struggle. It's a big problem. There was actually a book written about this called Flipping Out a number of years ago, but studying this phenomenon of, let's say, boys and girls who go to yeshiva for the year after Israel and after high school and wondering like, wait a minute, they went to 12 years of yeshiva and like nothing clicked. And all of a sudden you go to Israel and they're whacked out. I mean, like what's going on? Now, by the way, there's a lot to be said for it. There's a lot of positives and there's a lot of downsides also. One of my greatest disappointments in my life was a friend of mine who I looked up to, and he became so observant, and it was like really inspiring. And then he forget about like not following anymore. He became such an anti-Jew. He became a very, I'm not going to tell you his name, but he became a very well-known author and playwright. And he's written books and he's written shows for Netflix and things like that. And very well known from a very prominent rabbinic family. And it like crushed my soul when I saw it happen to him. Because he was like an inspiration for me. Like, wow, he could do it. I can also like, I can handle this. And, because when there's like American Judaism, and then there's like Israel Judaism, and then we're trying to figure out how the two are, whatever, I'm sure everybody knows somebody that's been through it. So you can imagine that these two, not for a year in Israel, but for 12 years in a cave with just the two of them, and all they ever do is daven and learn on such a level where they can compose the Zohar. They can compose the deepest mystical interpretations of the Torah. Now, by the way, it's natural that when people like this have these gatherings, who comes to visit you? Eliyahu Hanavi. So the Gemara says Eliyahu Hanavi came. He stood at the entrance to the cave and he said, "Who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor is dead and his decree is annulled?" So, meaning the emperor is dead and the decree is annulled, it's safe to come out. So they left the cave. Now, what's it like when you leave a cave after 12 years? And you kind of have to readjust to life, and you have to see things. And this happens like if you haven't been somewhere for a long time. If you ever go back, I don't know, if you go back to your hometown, let's say, if you haven't been there for a long time, or even if you haven't been in Israel for a very long time, and when you go back and you see all the buildings and the roads and this and that, or if you go back to your school or something like that. And I remember the first time I went back to my first sleepaway camp, and I'm like, wow, it's a lot smaller than I remember. And then I realized that, no, I was a lot smaller then and things were bigger. But, your perspectives change. So they come out and look what happens. When they saw people plowing and sowing. So here these two guys emerge from the cave. I don't know if anybody remembers them or what they look like. They must have had very long beards. And who knew who they were and what were they doing? So they say, "Oy Gewalt." They see people working. Oy Gewalt, yay. People, we're sitting and learning all day and they're working. How can anybody work? Work, it's a 4-letter word, oy Gewalt. So they said these people ignore eternal life. They ignore Torah study and they occupy themselves with temporal life. Anything they cast their eyes on was burned immediately. So they were so zealous that they would burn, and the Gemara is speaking literally. I don't know if it actually is literal, but they're saying, "Oh, you're burning it like you." They couldn't tolerate anyone who was not like them. By the way, this is a great story about Teshuva. This is good for Lag BaOmer. It's good for Pesach, Shavuos, particularly Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. And it's never too early to repent. We say, repent now, avoid the June rush. So how can they burn their eyes? So therefore, a heavenly voice comes and says, "You come out of the cave to destroy my world? Otherwise, go back to the cave." So they went back into the cave and they stayed there for another 12 months. So now there's a total of 13 years in this cave. They go back to the cave. They're there for a year. Why 12 months? Because the wicked are punished in Gehenna for 12 months. And we shouldn't be worse than that. By the way, this has to do very much relates to the notion of mourning also, that mourning is for a year for a parent. And Kaddish is only for 11 months related to this because, we don't want to say if the 12 months you're saying, oh, your loved one is in Gehenna. No, 11 months, and that's good enough. Okay, so you should be worse than that. A heavenly voice came forth and says, okay, go out of your cave. So they went out. So now they came out of the cave. They got thrown back in the cave. They're there for another year for like a refresher course. They have to do a little behavior modification, whatever it might be. And they're back in the cave for a year, and now they can go out. So they go out, and whenever Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's sons, or Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, whenever he would see somebody and he would wound them by casting a disapproving glance, right? Rabbi Shimon would heal. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he seems to have gained a lot of perspective in the cave, where he's able to now heal people in the cave. And Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon still has some work to do. But you know what? That wouldn't be unusual, certainly in the realm of youth versus, adulthood or seniority. And by the way, youth, when he went in, he was 13 years younger. Okay, so how old could he have been? Okay, but still, there's something about life experience, okay? So Rabbi Shimon says to him, he says, my son, you and I are sufficient for the world. And this is a great line in the Gemara, Kedaihu Rabbi Shimon. He says, in other words, for the Torah studying in the world, like you and I can carry the burden. Not everyone can attain our lofty level of understanding. So on a Friday afternoon before sunset, they see an old man hurrying along with 2 bunches of myrtles in his hand. He has like 2 flowers. You see, there's something nice about seeing Jews getting ready for Shabbos. I said it's one of the things that we always say the difference that we have in Israel than here in America. In Israel, certainly, like if you're in a religious community, but even in a non-religious community, you see the Erev Shabbos. You see what it's like for people to get ready for Shabbos.
Even in non-religious, everyone gets together Friday night. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm saying, but I'm talking about like that. I'm saying, but the Friday afternoon, like the Friday morning, you see people like going and cooking and getting together and buying flowers. So when you see a Jew walking in the street with flowers, oh, Prachim l'Shabbat, right? That's what you know. It's a beautiful thing. We don't experience that here. Again, we're not. But even in the Jewish neighborhoods, you don't necessarily feel that the same way that you feel in Eretz Yisrael. Okay. So he goes, he sees a man, he's carrying flowers for Shabbos, and he says, there's 2 of them. He says, why do you have 2? He says, what's it for? He says, it's in honor of Shabbos. He says, wouldn't 1 be enough? He says, no, 1 is for Zachar, 1 is for Shamar. We know we have 2 versions of the 10 Commandments, 1 in Parashas Yisrael, 1 in Parashas V'Eschanan, and one time it says Zachar es Yom HaShabbos, 1 says Shamar es Yom HaShabbos. Remember the day of the Shabbos, safeguard the day of the Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon says to his son, you see, look how beautiful the mitzvahs are to Yisrael, and they calm down. So you could see a change of perspective, whereas they come out of the cave the first time and they're unbelievably zealous, and the next time they come out, Manar, look how beautiful my God's children are. Rav Pinchas ben Yair, Rav Shimon's son-in-law, he heard that Rav Shimon had emerged from the cave, so he went to greet him. So of course he's like, the Shver is back in town. So he took him to the bathhouse and he tried to dress the wounds on his flesh, and seeing the gaps in his body caused by sitting in the sand, he began to cry, and his salty tears dripped into the wounds, so that Rav Shimon began to scream with pain. Rav Pinchas ben Yair says, woe to me that I see you in such a state. And he's like, well, stop crying on me, stop hurting me. On the contrary, Rav Shimon replied, it's wonderful that you see me like this, for if you did not see me in this condition, I would not have been as learned as I am. It was through the suffering that he gained his great knowledge. For before this episode, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai would ask Rav Pinchas ben Yair a question. Rav Pinchas Yair would give him 13 answers. But after the experience, Rav Pinchas ben Yair asked a question, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai would give him 24 answers. So in other words, the Gemara says he became really Torah knowledgeable. Okay. Let me show you the next page. And we have here 2 different Gemaras. Okay. And both including Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. This is on Brachos Lamed Hey, which is exactly 2 blot after the Gemara we just read. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai Omer. Efshar Adam Chorish b'shas Charisha, V'zorea b'shas Zaria, V'kotzer b'shas Ktsira, V'dosh b'shas Disha, V'zoreh b'shas Haruach, Torah Matahela. Rav Shimon says, is it possible that a person plows in the plowing season, and he sows in the sowing season, and he harvest season, and he threshes in the threshing season, and he winnows in the winnow season, as grain is separated from the chaff by means of the wind, and he's always busy? What's going to happen to Torah? If you're busy working, when are you going to learn? Ela bizman sheYisrael osin ritzon shel makom, malachta nasas al yedei cherem. But rather, if you dedicate, I'll read the translation. If you dedicate yourself exclusively to Torah at the expense of other endeavors, as when the Jewish people perform God's will, then the work will be performed by others. And it says, because he proves from a pasuk, v'amdu zarim v'road sonachem. And strangers will stand and feed your flocks, and foreigners will be your plowmen and your vine dressers. And if you don't follow, then guess what? Then you're going to have to do it yourself. And Torah matahei, what's going to happen to Torah? That's the Gemara in Brachos. The next Gemara is a Gemara in Menachos on 99b. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Here we have again Rav Shimon Bar Yochai again. By the way, if you notice that sometimes they spell Yochai here with an aleph, and sometimes they spell it without an aleph. It's the same person though, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. And they say that there's a pasuk that refers to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Hold on. The pasuk says, right, The pasuk in Devarim says, "Ki lo tishakach mipi zaro," that the Torah will never be forgotten from the children, from all your descendants, is the promise that's given at the end of Devarim, and the end of that "Ki lo tishakach mipi zaro" is Yochai. Has the end of each one of those words spells out the name Yochai. In other words, that it's through Rab Shimon Bar Yochai that we have the continuance of Torah. So look what he says here in the Gemara Menachos. Afilu lo kara adam ela kriya shma shachris v'arvis kayim lo yomosh. The Torah says lo yomosh sefer Torah zemipicha. You cannot have Torah depart from your mouth. So here the Gemara is this, and there's a great debate in the Gemara of we have a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. There's a mitzvah to study Torah. What is the requirement of Torah study? Is there a minimal requirement? Is there a maximal requirement? So here they quote the opinion of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai that even if you just said Shema, you said Shema in the morning, you said Kriya Shema at night, and then you fulfilled the obligation. He says, "V'dav is asur la'omer v'nei amei haaretz, v'ravar mitzvah la'omer v'nei am haaretz." And he says, you know what? Don't give away the secret. Don't say it in front of people, someone who's an ignorant, an amaretz, because they're likely to get the impression that there's no need to study Torah beyond this. And Rava says, no, you should state it, because then at least, you know what, if they just say Shema, it'll lead to such great reward. And all the more so how great the reward is those who study all day and all night. In other words, he's not saying that's all you have to do, but that's the minimal you have to do, okay? So many of the Mefarshim, they point out the contradiction in these Gemaras. On the one hand, in the first Gemara, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that if a person's working, what's going to happen to Torah? You have to be studying Torah all the day. And if you study all the time and you do God's will, and everything will be done for you, which is kind of maybe you'll say today is like a naive approach. You can't sit by a tree and study Gemara and think that everything's going to be provided for you. It doesn't work like that. On the other hand, he says, no, it's a very minimalist approach that if you just say Shema, then you're covered. And Rava says you should even tell everybody this because, people have a hard time tolerating when people are not on the same level as they are. They can't understand, so anybody who's involved in Kiruv, we have a master Kiruv professional with us here in person this morning, right? So Miriam with NCSY, I'm sure that when she deals with kids who are going to public school who don't have a tremendous background or knowledge, and she's not yelling and screaming at them, how come you're not keeping Shabbos? But if they go to a Jewish event, if they light a menorah, if they hear a Megillah, if they do something, you're like lifted up, like, wow, that's amazing. That's a great thing. Look what you're doing. Look at the reward that you're getting. And that's the attitude in the second Gemara. So how do we juxtapose these two Gemaras? So what many of the Mefarshim point out is that these two Gemaras reflect two different positions of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai before the cave, and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai after the cave. Or maybe after cave 1, before cave 2, after cave 2. In other words, why did we go back to the beginning of the story? Why would Rav Shimon Bar Yochai state something negative about the government? Because his perspective at the time was Torah matahei aleha. Everything we do is for the sake of Torah. Nothing's going to stand in our way. Nothing can get in our way. And if we're doing the will of God, it doesn't matter what we do. God's going to protect us. God's going to provide for us this and that. The only problem is that, you know what? Somebody had some other ideas about that. He has to go into hiding. And afterwards, he has to modify his position. And he has to realize that, you know what? Maybe for certain people, Torah matahei aleha, certain people are designated. They should be the Torah giants of the generation. And everyone else should do what they can. Everyone else should study. If that only means Kriya Shema in the morning and Kriya Shema at night, so be it. But that's a beautiful thing. If you see a Jew and all they're doing is two bunches of flowers, Shamar and Zachar, beautiful. That's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen for Shabbos. And maybe that's a greater fulfillment of their Shabbos than I could ever do, because each one is held accountable to his or her own level. So here we have Rav Shimon Bar Yochai before the cave, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai after the cave. And this is and this is part of what is celebrated or observed on Lag BaOmer. Now, by the way, Lag BaOmer itself is a turning point in the Jewish calendar. I know there are many different customs, but basically speaking, up until Lag BaOmer, we kind of refrain from festive things. And then after Lag BaOmer, now we can have live music. I still can't, not until December. We have live music and we have concerts and we have this and we have that. And we can get a haircut, all these, we can make weddings. It's like everything. But maybe that's exactly meant to reflect this transition in the life of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai of like before and after. And we should all look at the different stages in our lives where maybe we have this kind of like watershed moment of the before and the after. That there are certain things that happen to our lives that we have such perspective. Okay, I'll say it to you. I've said this to you a million times. That's never stopped me from repeating anything. I'm just running out of material. So what do you want? I'm old and I can't remember stuff. So when I decided I'm going to go into the rabbinate, and when it first started when I was in yeshiva, and I was learning full time, and I finished college and all that. And one summer we decided that we're going to go down to Jacksonville, Florida, and we're going to run something called the Seed Program, which was we spent a month in Jacksonville, Florida, and we enriched the community. We were there to teach classes.
Like as an adult, when you were married?
I was 19.
Oh.
I was not yet married. I was not yet thinking about getting married. But I was 19 and I'm going to change the world. Change the world. And by the way, nobody knew more than I did. Okay. I knew everything. No seasoned rabbi, no nothing. Because, I decided I'm going to go into this and I'm going to change the world and I'm going to be incredible. And you just wait and see. Okay. And God has a funny way of dealing with people like me. And so we go down there for a month and we run a camp for the kids. And by the way, it was there that I first realized that maybe this is something that I could do. Okay, so that helped form my career. So if you have any issues, just blame Jacksonville, Florida, and it's their fault. And by the way, the rabbi who was there then, he's now a rabbi in Connecticut, and we're still very, very much in touch. On the way, we drove down, much like I drove back. I drove through Jacksonville a couple weeks ago. It's a big city. There's a lot there, but it's at 3 a.m. It's not that interesting. And we stopped. We had one of the things that Rabbi Wein did in his yeshiva was one of the greatest things that he did is he didn't encourage everybody to go into Klei Kodesh. Not everybody should be in education, Jewish education. Not everybody should be in the rabbinate. But he said, you know what? You have to train also responsible balabatim, responsible congregants who could set an example of what it means to live in a community and to be Torah Jews and to be study and to help teach and to help inspire. And he sent them all over the country. So one of the places that he sent them was Norfolk, Virginia. So Norfolk, Virginia, we went there for Shabbos. It was like a natural stopping. We went there for Shabbos, and then we're going to drive after Shabbos straight to Jacksonville. We had a bunch of chaverim there. We had a great Shabbos. Oh, we're the kids from yeshiva. We're coming to town. We're going to change. Well, look at us. Come on, roll out the red carpet. Klib is here. All right. So we get there, and you know me that I'm very punctual. I get to shul, starts 9 o'clock. I get there 8:45, and the rabbi I had met Friday night, rabbi's not there. Rabbi shows up 10 o'clock. I go, what kind of whack place is this? What kind of rabbi? You think you don't know how good I'm going to be at this. You're going to show up at 10 o'clock. So of course I cut him down in 2 seconds, and I know exactly 10 o'clock. What are you doing? And then there's a guy in front of me, and out of town I understand it's a little bit different, and people do things differently. Comes time for Shemona Esrei, and the guy's sitting down with Shemona. I'm standing right behind him, looking over his shoulder like this, and I see he's reading Shemona Esrei, and like, dude, your rabbi comes late. No wonder you don't know that you're supposed to stand up for Shemona Esrei. What kind of doofus are you? Like, what's happening here? And then God said, okay, you're gonna go back in the cave. And I'm not comparing myself to Shimon Bar Yochai, but I had to go in my own cave and get my own sense. And it turns out that the rabbi gets there at 8 o'clock. The rabbi gets there at 8 o'clock because he runs a beginner service for people that don't know how to read. And from 8 to 10, he runs a beginner service, right? And the guy in front of me, he had this congenitive heart condition, a heart failure condition, which he was physically unable to stand for long periods of time. And not only that, but he lived in Virginia Beach, but he bought a house as close to the shul as possible just to be there for Shabbos so he wouldn't have to drive, so he could walk. And he asked the rabbi what he should do. The rabbi said, no, of course, you should sit down. Better you should be in shul. You should say Shemona Esrei there, not standing up. Oh boy, did I get such a patch from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he said, you think you know everything. You think you know anything. Let me show you. So you have to look at these watershed moments in your life to realize that, you're not as smart as you think you are, or you're not as this, or you're not as that. And by the way, there are other people that have other ways of looking at things. I'll go back to what we discussed last week, that unity does not mean conformity. Unity does not mean that everybody should do it like I do it. Unity means that we have the same ideals and we're under the same banner and we're entitled to disagree with one another. We're entitled to have different approaches. And you know that I fully subscribe to that. And I'm pretty sure that, the way I've practiced certainly reflects that. And anybody who, we love that when one of the greatest things that I have here that I really enjoy is when I can get somebody to the Amud, even if it's just for a Marav, like once. It's such an accomplishment, and I feel like tremendous pride, like getting something to do that. And people are like, oh, why do we do this? And when you're young and you're so idealistic, you think we're going to change the world, we're going to change this, and then in the end, you kind of like how do people show up? I'm glad people are here, type of thing. So I think that on Lag BaOmer this week, which is an important, and again, it's a very holy day. So if you want to get mystical, but I'm not old enough to be mystical, but to see this is why I think this is such a great Teshuva story of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the greatness. What makes his great character? Not so much that he wrote the Zohar, which is great, I'm sure, but I don't study much Zohar, but that he has the self-awareness, that he has the ability to kind of change midstream and say, look, maybe my view of the world needs to be changed. Maybe my perspective needs to be altered. Maybe I need to, think about how I view other people, whether it's globally, whether it's communally, whether it's personally. And if I could do, and starts with yourself. And if I could do that, that can help inspire others. So you go from like, oh my God, everybody has to be learning all day long to, Kriya Shema Shachris, Kriya Shema Arvis. If you say Kriya Shema, that's the most beautiful thing in the world. And I think that's a tremendous lesson for all of us. It's something we have to learn, we have to embrace. And then especially if we deal with people that have a weaker background than we have, or no less than we do, or whatever it is, we have to help bring them along. We have to help encourage, we have to help inspire. And we have to be, of course, most importantly, most understanding of people who are not us. And we have to appreciate where every single person is coming from. So I think that's one of the beauties of this story of Bar Yochai. And maybe next time, if you're going to go to Meron and you're going to go visit the kever, you'll think about this instead of thinking about all the heebie-jeebie stuff and the brachos and this and that. And you're going to go to Amukah and find a shidduch and you're going to like whatever it is. I never did any of that, but you know what? This is Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is coming on Friday, Mishta Hashem, and then you could look at the song if you have a translation of Bar Yochai and Shat Ashracha, and you'll see the translation of it and how it's reflecting the character of Bar Yochai. So everybody should have a wonderful holiday, a wonderful Lag BaOmer. Make sure your arrows fly straight. What I do is I shoot the arrows and then we paint the bullseyes around them. So that's how we go. Have a great day, everyone.
Did you find out why the
Thank you.
arrows?
Thank
Did
you.
find out why the arrows and why the fire?
Yeah, because it said that when the kids were in the forest and in the times of Bar Kokhba and Rabbi Kiva, I don't know, you have these legends about them playing in the forest, hiding from the Romans, and that's how we do it. So, yeah, I don't know. My mother
Rabbi,
let me play with arrows. So
Nice lesson. Thank you.
Rabbi, I drove through Jacksonville yesterday. Oh, he just left.
He leaves fairly quickly. Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Have a good day.
You too.